Ladies and gentlemen, you're welcome to GST 113, Federal University of Lafayette. And in today's lecture, we'd like to begin with an introductory lecture so that we'll be able to explore what is Nigerian people and culture. We'll be able to define some of the basic things we expect to meet in the course of our lecture, for the semester. And so today's lecture, like I say again, is an introductory lecture. First is the introductory lecture, the introduction. The first thing is that we need to know that Nigeria, even though it was a creation of the British colonial system, had a framework that existed in the pre-colonial times. And this is one of the things that we're going to look at by and by in the lecture. We need that kind of pre-colonial background for us to understand the people of Nigeria, the ethnic diversity, and as well as even the cultural resource, which is what we really want to focus on in this introductory lecture. Secondly, we also need to understand that Nigeria as a nation is so diverse in terms of the ethnic groups of the people of Nigeria, and over 400, so to speak. But it's important also to look at the fact that despite this diversity of our ethnicity, over 400 ethnic groups, so to say, yet Nigeria is smaller compared to China in terms of the diversity of our people, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of the kind of people that we have in this country. At least China has over 500 or more, and of course bigger also in land size than Nigeria. The same complex nature or problem of ethnicity just like Nigeria. The same thing also compared to India. Nigeria has an ethnic population in terms of the people in that is far less than India. Yet India has been able to make some considerable progress over time and achieve some level of development. The same thing also to the United States of America, smaller compared to these countries. Now, why we decided to do this is very simple. It's for us to understand that there's a need for this comparative analysis of people in terms of people and culture. That Nigeria is not just unique alone in this kind of challenge that Nigeria faces in terms of our ethnic diversity, people, and as well as culture. In our next slide is for us to appreciate the aims and objective of this course, which is very important, because we may ask, why do we need a GST? Nigerian people and culture. Generally, in the university system, GSTs are very important because it helps, students to expose students to areas, wider than their areas of specialty. In a normal university system, sometimes you find yourself specializing either in the sciences or sometimes in the medical sciences or sometimes in the social sciences or sometimes in the humanities. But even then, sometimes we have a narrow specialization that takes us down to very specific units of what we're studying. But the general study courses helps to bring this kind of broad exposure. It exposes students to broad areas so that we begin to know certain things beyond maybe in our field of studying. But it's important to understand what is Nigerian, what is the people of Nigeria, and of course the culture of Nigeria. And so the first thing we need to understand is to appreciate our ethnic diversity. This is something that sometimes we may have heard it again and again, that we're made up of diverse ethnic groups. So many. Some people see it as a blessing, while some other people see it as a curse. But it's important that first and foremost we appreciate the fact that yes, we're made up of different people from different backgrounds over time. We've grown over time, over space a bit. We've come together to form this country called Nigeria, and we're part of one country that is called Nigeria. And this is very critical because, Nigeria, like I say from the background when we started the introductory lecture, I say very clearly that we are not an exception in terms of countries that have this kind of diversity. And we begin to appreciate the fact that if other countries across the world, like China, even countries like Britain, the United States of America, and India, also went through this kind of diversity or have experienced this kind of diversity, then perhaps there is a fair chance for Nigeria for us to not just appreciate that also, but secondly, like I said, promote mutual coexistence. And we begin to see that, look, what can we do, to explore our similarities to come together to promote a sense of unity. What are those areas where we can say, look, we can depend on each other? We need each other in this country, rather than sometimes again and again from some quarters, people will come out to say, look, this thing is not working, this whole project called Nigeria. And if it's not working, why not break it up? Why don't you divide this country and, of course, forget about the country? But the lesson is for us to know that, other countries have been able to manage this kind of, peopling and of cultural, differences, and, of course, into a common nationhood, what we refer to as nation building. So there's a lot for us to learn in that respect. Thirdly, is how we can exploit culture, the cultural resource as a base station for development. There's so much in our culture we're going to see by and by that can help promote a sense of development. And again, I would like to make references much later as we will see, how the Asian tigers have been able to exploit their cultural base station for development. And of course, next is to promote this unique sense of identity as Nigerians. We are Nigerians, and it's good that we define ourselves as Nigerians. Sometimes it's most unfortunate, again, we've seen this again and again in our national history. Most of the times by politicians who would like to divide this country in such a way that we don't believe in ourselves as being Nigerians. But of course, we want to promote a sense that, look, we have an identity. We are Nigerians. And of course, there again, the promote national cohesion and unity. There's every need for this in Nigeria. Again and again, if we look at this country, we know that we need a sense of national unity and cohesion. Next is the body of the election, properly now. Now, the first thing there for us to note is the fact that pre-colonial Nigeria had a framework where diverse ethnic groups and, of course, what we may refer to as civilizations also existed during this period in question. If you look at the entire what you call north central Nigeria, or maybe if we sometimes refer to as the Middle Belt area, the North culture existed in this place. That was one complex civilization, that has been discovered by, archaeologists over time. And of course, radiocarbon dating from some of the artifacts recovered, the terracotta heads, indicated that culture is as old as 1,000 years old. In other words, this suggests to us that this area, Nigeria, has been in existence for over 1,000 years, with ethnic groups living here in diversity and, of course, doing a lot of things in terms of our cultural, heritage. Next is the Igbo culture that is in the southeast Nigeria. It's a cultural complex, that also has been subjected by radiocarbon dating that goes back to 1,000 years ago. It's important for us to know this and to appreciate that we did have a civilization. We did have a beginning, that we were somewhere in our national history, even before, the age of British colonial, subjugation of Nigeria. And of course, you have Iwole Ruda is in the southwest Nigeria, where you also have this kind of civilization. So the point here is that we did have a civilization. And this is very, very important, most especially when we're dealing against the tide of Western imperialism that sometimes tends to define us as a people, without a civilization, a people without a culture. If you remember some of the arguments that were put up by some, British historians who said that, look, at this point, there's no histories to study in Africa. What exists in Africa is darkness, and darkness is not the subject of history. But the fact is that, yes, we did have a history, we did have a background, and of course, there's something worthwhile studying about our background and appreciating ourselves as Nigerians. Next is, of course, the fact that there was the existence of pre-colonial states, kingdoms, and empires. Several of these states and empires in northern Nigeria, what today is northern Nigeria, had the Hausa states that dates back as far back as the 6th, 7th century AD, of course, when these states began to evolve. And of course, many of these states, tracing the origins, to the Middle East, of course. And of course, these states were founded, of course, you also have Kano and Borno, which is also one of those states in northern Nigeria that has a history that spans over 1,000 years, before British, imperial intervention in Nigeria. And of course, you have the Yoruba kingdoms. And of course, you also have, the Benin Kingdom, of course you have also other states in Nigeria, like the Jukun state, the Tiv, the Aragon, and of course the Egons and etc. These states existing in pre-colonial setting, with diverse kind of intergroup relations. The point to note is that these states had a form of relations, mutual coexistence, and of course entered into all forms of relationship in terms of the exchange, of cultural ideas. Now, as from the beginning of the 20th century precisely, Nigeria came under the conquest of the British, the empire, so to speak. And of course, when Nigeria became a British territory, we see, every attempt to define Nigeria, along ethnic lines and perhaps also along, religious lines. What British imperialism did was to divide Nigeria into what is known as a tripartite system: the northern region, the eastern region, and the western region. Now, these regions became a concomitant of what we may say maybe the northern region for the Hausas and the Fulanis, and of course the western region for the Yorubas, and of course the eastern region for the Igbos. Now, that tripartite system and definition of Nigeria has come to affect us the way we view Nigeria and we understand Nigeria. In the post-independence era, it was not surprising to see that many of our nationalists in Nigeria, our leaders in Nigeria, many of them didn't have confidence in what is called Nigeria today, and of course came out to define Nigeria in different directions. For instance, Chief Obafemi Awolowo, one of the foremost nationalists, did say that nothing like Nigeria exists. For now, there's nothing like Nigeria. Nigeria is just a mere geographical expression. Now, if we hold that very seriously, of course, it has a lot of implications in terms of who we are as Nigerian, as a people, and as a culture, and etc. But we're saying here in this lecture that we are a people, and of course the people and ethnicity, so there's so much in terms of the people that makes up Nigeria, and as well as the ethnicity. As a matter of fact, like we said from the beginning, that there are nearly over 400 ethnic groups that makes up this country called Nigeria. So we shouldn't just look at ourselves as some kind of accident of history that was defined by British imperialism. We stated this fact that, look, even before then, there was that framework for the existence of Nigeria before then. And of course, what British imperialism did perhaps was to bring together these diverse ethnic groups and merge them together into a nation called Nigeria. And of course, we're not just an exception in world history where this kind of situation of this kind of, social engineering took place, where the diverse elements were brought together into a common nation called, a state. And next is that, what is culture? And here we say clearly there are two aspects of culture. There is the ideal facts of culture, which has to do with the ideas, the principles, the values of a society. That translates into the politics, the religion, of course, even the social aspects of a nation as a people. We may refer to that as the ideal facts of culture. And of course, the second is the artifacts of culture. That has to do with the material, aspect of culture, the technology, the science, the architecture. Of course, everything that is material, that is physical, comprises of the artifacts of culture. So culture is a very broad term. So what we're really trying to look at is first, the people of Nigeria, in terms of the ethnicity. Secondly, in terms of the culture, and of course how this can be brought together for us to understand what is Nigeria and for us to appreciate what is development in Nigeria. And we're saying here clearly that for us to understand this, the relationship, the interface between what is the people of Nigeria, that ethnicity, and of course the cultural base and how that translates into development. Perhaps we need to also understand certain aspects of history, that has come to impact on the cultural, sense of Nigeria. First, the fact that yes, due to British imperialism, beginning from the 20th century, most aspects of our culture, came under a decline, most especially the artifacts of our culture, in terms of our technology, in terms of our science, in terms of our architecture. Most of this came under a decline as a result of British imperialism. And of course, that has an attendant consequences and impact in terms of our cultural development. Today, we live in a nation, in a country, where we hardly appreciate our cultural base, our cultural background. Most of our cultural legacy, so to speak, have come under decline. For instance, if you take our in indigenous technologies, which we had in time past, like the blacksmithing, even sometimes the furniture, etc., or the pottery, etc. So many of these, came under decline simply because we came under some kind of British imperialism that impacted negatively on our culture. Of course, the major objective of British imperialism was to suppress our culture so that Western culture, what you call European science and technology, will take ascendancy over our cultures, and we become dependent upon what we may refer to as this sense of Western science and culture or technology as we see it. And so our culture has suffered some kind of decline in that respect. But the other aspect that's also suffered a decline has to do with the fact that, even in terms of our artifacts of culture that defines our identity, that gives us a sense of uniqueness, that, defines us as a people, that also has come under some kind of decline. And of course, we see clearly in Nigeria, today that most of us do not really appreciate our cultural roots, our cultural backgrounds in terms of our religion, in terms of our social, value system, in terms of our traditional values, in terms of our, of course, even sometimes in terms of our custom, values that were very, very helpful in terms of defining us as a people. There are so many in that respect. For instance, it's so difficult for young people to respect elders. And of course, when it comes to issues like marriages, of course, there's a breakdown of marriages in several respects. So difficult for people to respect marriage institutions. And of course, even when it comes to the issues of religion, so difficult for people to appreciate our indigenous religious background in several ways. Our culture has gone under decline as a result of this, as a result of British imperialism. And we say next that, if we put all of this together, what is the major lesson for us? Where are we heading to? What is it that we really want to bring out in this lecture, in this introductory lecture? That first there's the need for a cultural renaissance. Now that is a broad, concept. It simply means we need to appreciate our culture, some kind of national rebirth, some kind of, revival of our cultural basis, and I said here very clearly, if you look at, going to the concluding aspect of our lectures, which is very clearly, that brings us some of these issues very clearly, is that if the Asian tigers today are anything to go by, China, South Korea, Malaysia, Indonesia, etc., many, of course, even Taiwan, is because many of these countries exploited their cultural resource, believed in their culture, and of course have been able to use their culture for development. Even in terms of, technological development, that has been so, and of course, believing in the sense of their identity, and of course going back to look at what they have, to develop it. And for us as Nigerians, if we're going to make or achieve some level of development, anything, that will help this country in terms of our national transformation, then we need to appreciate our cultural base. Because remember, we're saying that culture is not just the identity, it's not just the artifacts alone, but it's also the artifacts of culture. And of course, we need to do that, so that we can appreciate it. Take, for instance, architectural design. There's nothing wrong if we can research in our indigenous architectural designs. And of course, even our indigenous technological evolutions that began in the past. For instance, the salt mining across Nigeria, the textile, industries, that's the indigenous textile industries across Nigeria, the dyeing industries across Nigeria, many of this, indigenous, cultural resource bases that can help us. For instance, here in Nasarawa State, we know, for instance, that look, Kiana, salt mining has continued to be one of the major cultural resources that can be harnessed for development. And we know also that there exists some kind of dyeing industries, for local fabrics, and of course, where some local fabrics can, be given, proper colors and of course proper dyeing and produced in a proper manner. So culture can become a resource for development if we begin to appreciate the role of culture and what culture can do. If you look into, of course, if you take the world of medical sciences, for instance, also there are a lot of, what you may call herbal roots. And of course, we know that in that direction, there is this, move to say, look, let's explore in terms of our traditional medical care, what we had that was indigenous, and see how that can complement, Western medical care, what we call Western Orthodox medical care. The Chinese and the Indians have done that very successfully over time and have been able to use culture as a resource for development. And there's every need for us to understand that and, of course, to use it. Next, we say that, look, there's also the need for us to some kind of renaissance of cultural identity. And it's so overwhelming now. And if you look at Nigeria, the average Nigerian today, you discover that, look, we don't have a sense of identity in world history. We want to look like Europeans. We want to look like Chinese. We want to look like Americans, but we hardly want to look like Nigerians. We hardly believe in our cultural roots in terms of our dress styles, our dress codes, even our language, in terms of even the music and meaning, things put together. And of course, we have forgotten the fact that we have come under this tide of Western globalization that seeks to change our identity and to redefine us and to give us some kind of picture that, we're different people from what we used to be. I am so proud to say this, that at least at the Federal University of Lafayette, there are efforts to see that our students, appreciate our sense of culture, our sense of decency. Why would you want to look like the street, dropout in Washington or in America on the streets of New York, or like that drug addict out there, instead of looking responsible, dressed in your indigenous traditional attires and of course doing what is there. And even in terms of our dishes, if you look at what we're eating today, in terms of, what you call, our menu, the food that we take. The fact is that most of us don't appreciate the fact that, indigenous dishes and indigenous foods are more better in terms of, helping us in terms of, health needs and many other things put together. So we need to do that. Then the next is that, look, there's a need for national cohesion and unity. And I will have this to say, that for countries like the United States of America, they've been able to explore their sense of ethnic diversity. And as a matter of fact, America began as a nation of migrants. And of course, America has always been proud to say, look, we are a nation of migrants. And of course, that we encourage migration of diverse ethnic groups to settle in America. Today, American is peopled with almost every racial group on the face of the earth, or ethnic group that you can find on the face of the earth. Sometimes it looks as if Americans will go out to every corner of the world to see that, look, if there's no ethnic group, or if they can find an ethnic group that is not in America, they will bring that ethnic group over to America. And of course, they know what it means in order to exploit that ethnic resource to bring people together, and of course to use the best in people for national cohesion, for national unity, and of course even for nation building. We need to learn a lesson in that. Why is it that in Nigeria, ethnicity and peopling has become a major challenge to national development? The basic fact is that we're yet to appreciate the fact that, look, in our diversity, there's everything that we can learn, that we can come together, we can pull our resources together, that there's the need for mutual, existence and interdependence, that, that had existed even before the period of British, colonial imperialism in Nigeria. As a matter of fact, we need each other, to coexist as a nation. If we look at it very critically, it's not everything, that the South produces, just as it's not everything the northern part of Nigeria produces. It's not everything that your society produces. If you look inward very closely, we depend on each other in a mutual coexistence. And of course, there's every need for us to exchange, some level of relationship, to exchange goods and services, and to promote a sense of unity. That is better when we live together as one, indivisible nation called Nigeria. Each time I look at Nigeria, take any region of Nigeria, and take a look at it. It's better we live together as a people, exchanging relationship and doing everything we can in order to promote our unity. If you look at the northern parts of Nigeria, most of the goods and services that comes up to the north are from the south. If you take the palm oil, for instance, the pine produce, for instance, there are many of these products that are coming from the south into the north, and of course the north simply cannot grow some of these products, so we need each other in this nation, and we cannot pretend that, look, we do not need each other. So there's every need for national cohesion and unity, exploring our diversity and see what we can do so that we can develop a sense of development. And then there's a need for us to think more as Nigerians. There is more allegiance to Nigeria than our ethnic affiliation. And I think this is very important. I said this from the background. Do we accept that Nigeria is just a mere geographical expression, like some of our political activists or nationalists did say from the past? Or there's something we can do to promote a sense of unity, a sense of being Nigerian, and of course, a sense of allegiance to Nigeria. And I think that, look, there's everything that we can do, yes, so that we can avoid this state of being affiliated to our ethnic background. People say this, and of course, sometimes it's clear, that we believe first in the sense of our ethnicity more than the sense of being a Nigerian. And how do we promote that sense of being a Nigerian? Some years ago, of course, I read, I think, 2 books like that, or very quite, instructive and very informative by, Peter Nahoro, How to Be a Nigerian. Very funny, very comic. And of course, he brought us some of these issues there clearly and so on. But, we need to say, look, yes, we're Nigerians. We can define ourselves as Nigerians. If the Western world do not believe in us, there's every need that we believe in ourselves as Nigerians, and of course to foster that sense of unity and national integration, affiliation, to ethnicity, our, being local in terms of, our local background. We only put this country apart, and we never help us to appreciate one another in terms of what we're going to do together as a nation. And so next, here I say that, look, at the end of this, lecture, I hope, very strongly that we begin to develop a more sense of patriotism and nationalism in our thinking. This is very, very important, very, very fundamental if we're going to make something good come of this nation. We should de-emphasize this, sense of being, I wouldn't want to use the word tribalism, because tribalism is a concept that is with a lot of racial stereotyping. So I believe in the concept ethnicity. We never lived as tribes because, like I said clearly, we depended upon each other. We had, mutual coexistence, and of course, we entered into different forms of relations with one another. And also, we're not just tribes, but we need, to promote that sense of being nationalistic and being patriotic, so that we take Nigeria as our country, as our own, and we know that there's no other country but Nigeria. And of course, we say this unity and diversity with something that we need to appreciate. Just that the other person is different, doesn't mean that, look, he's your enemy. It's a natural thing that the other person is labeled a Yoruba, the other person is labeled an Igbo, the other person is labeled a Hausa person. These are natural constructs, they are labels. And of course, it doesn't translate into any other thing, so different. And if you remove, these ethnic labels, what you can clearly see is a sense of our being human. So that is our collective identity. So of course, we need to promote that in every sense of it. And of course, we say, look, there's a need, like we said again, to use culture as a source for development. There's so much we can do in that respect. There's so much that we're yet to explore from our cultural background in terms of development that can help this country rise up as a giant. In the 1960s, we were the major exporter of palm oil and palm produce across the world. Malaysia, learned from Nigeria, exported some of those seeds. Today, Malaysia has overtaken Nigeria as a major producer of palm oil and exporter of palm oil, on the world stage. This is basically because we do not appreciate what we do have in terms of our cultural resource. Somebody said the other day, and of course it appears as if it's true, that we hardly believe in what we have until somebody will come from somewhere and say, look, this is what you have, then we begin to appreciate it. We know, for instance, now, as we speak, the Western countries are interested in many of the things we have in Nigeria. The other day, I was like trying to carry out a research on my own about bitter cola. And I've discovered that, look, it's scared to find it in the market, and of course it's very expensive. And some of the dealers told me clearly that the Chinese are here in Nigeria buying bitter colas in mass quantity, taking it overseas, of course, to produce it and resell it back to Nigeria. How many of us appreciate bitter cola, and we know what importance that can do, to our health. Most of the bio-health products that we take, some of the supplements that sometimes we refer to, these supplements are made from the kind of foods, from the kind of fruits, from the kind of things we produce right here in Nigeria. We need to appreciate that base so that we can use it for development. And of course, finally, we say, look, we need to, give more attention to our local environmental concerns. There's every need for that. We're too European in our outlook. We're too American in our outlook. The more attention we pay to our local environment and setting, the better that can be. In conclusion, I would like to thank you for listening to this lecture. Like I've said it again, it's an introductory lecture. We want to set out, this entire GST, 113 Nigerian people and culture. We expect that in the course of the semester, this fall semester, more and more, of these lectures will be on your way, and of course will come your way, and of course we're going to interact them more for you to understand about Nigerian peoples and culture. Finally, thank you for listening.